Hi everyone, this is Vikram Shah of Vikram Shah Consulting. I'm an MBA admissions consultant and I've been doing this since 2009. Um, we have a pretty unique model that we work on a basically success fee model, and a reward-based system essentially guarantees that we're completely invested in our clients. So today we're going to be talking about how to prepare for your MBA interview and especially the online interview. Now, the structure which we're going to follow is I'm going to talk a little bit about just the basics, the logistics, dress code, body language, before we get into the types of interviews, and then we really get into the meat of it, which is preparing answers. So the answer section as well, I'm going to break up into three key different areas, which is the common MBA interview questions, behavioral questions, and then everything else, most of which is self-awareness. So, when we're getting started, I think there are a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. Most MBA interviews are going to be conducted either by AdCom, alumni, or second year students. And keeping that audience in mind, I think you just need to be comfortable in the whole point of the interview is to get to know you. Um, okay, so let's get started with the logistics part of it first, which is the very basic. Because these are online interviews, you have to understand that technology plays a big role in it, and it's important to just check everything, make sure everything's
Hi,
working.
hi Vikram. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes,
Do you want to share your presentation?
not yet. There's still time for that.
Oh, okay. Oh, fine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, okay, but anyway, we shall do that as well. Let me share my screen so there is no confusion, and I will share the presentation as well. So we'll go live with this. This is just a minute. Yes. Okay, so today what we're going to do is, while we're talking about how to prepare for the MBA interview, I'm going to first start off with the logistics part of it. And again, like I was saying, these are, since they're all online, the most important thing you want to check is if you have a stable internet connection. Make sure your background is pretty clean, you're not cluttered, you don't have clothes lying around. Make sure your lighting is good, that not your face isn't hidden in shadows. Check for background noise. Um, if you have a very noisy fan, it can get quite disturbing. If you have pets or roommates who are slightly loud, I mean, those can be distractions as well. So those are sort of things that you may want to control. I've got pets, and honestly, I can't control them, but do your best. In terms of microphone, I think just make sure you're audible. There's no point doing an interview where you cannot be heard or the other person's really straining to hear you. And make sure your speakers are good as well so that you can hear the other person talk clearly. And in terms of seating, you're going to be sitting here for about half an hour to 45 minutes. So just make sure you're comfortable. Sit upright, sit towards the end of your chair, put in some energy, and you should be good to go. So these are the very, very basic things, but sometimes you would think that, okay, this is obvious, but you'd be surprised by how many times you see someone with an unstable internet connection. Then you're constantly running into problems. They just become a distraction. And in terms of sound as well, if you're not clear, not audible, it doesn't really serve any purpose. Second thing, just tech level. So this is an area which I've always had issues with, but I'm technology challenged to a certain extent. But just do a dry run, test everything. Don't do it on interview day. Do it a day ahead. Do it 2 days ahead. Um, make sure speaker's working. Make sure everything's working as well. In terms of notes, because these are online interviews, you can cheat a little bit. You can have prompts on the wall behind you if you do have one. Just make sure they're in big font and you're not constantly reading off a wall. Please do not read off a screen. And you can have some notes on the side of the table as well if you want. You can just glance down. But I find that quite distracting. And I think it can break your flow. And sometimes you may just rely a bit too much on memory. So if you have to do it, you can. That's an advantage of an online interview. But if you don't feel the need for, don't do it if it distracts you. And again, test before you actually commit to that idea. In terms of where should you look, uh, today laptops have cameras in all different places, some on the right hand side, some on the left, some right on the top center, etc. So in general, if you can look at the into the camera, that's great. But sometimes it can get quite difficult as well. Just normal human tendency is to look at the other person, to you're quite likely to look down on your screen. With mobile phones, it becomes slightly easier because the screen size is smaller. But don't worry about that. Let that not be a distraction. I think people understand and they're quite forgiving with online interviews as well. So just wherever you can, try and look into the camera. Otherwise, look at your screen and you should be fine. In terms of dress code, formals versus smart casuals, if given the option, I would always say dress formally. I'm not dressed formally today, but I'm a trainer and that's okay. But if you're a candidate, I think you have to dress formally. And if given the option, just dress formally. Some schools, like at Kellogg, etc., allow you to dress in smart casuals, but I don't think there can be anything wrong with you being dressed formally. And when it comes to just the basic stuff, I would say, you know, presentations do make a difference. So it does create a first impression. So if you can be well groomed, I don't think that's a choice. Just be well groomed. Make sure if you have a long beard, make sure it's trimmed. If you have long hair, make sure it's not falling off your face and you're constantly fidgeting. Make sure you're comfortable and there are no additional distractions as such. So that's some of the very basic things. There's one more section of it, which is about body language. I mean, it's okay to be nervous. I get nervous before every presentation, no matter how many times I've done it. And that's fine. That's a good sign. It shows that you're really interested. But at the end of it, be confident. You know yourself, you know your stories. So just be confident. Smile, put in some energy. You can sit on the edge of your chair if you like. And if that works for you, great. Just be comfortable. Don't fidget around too much. Be friendly. In fact, the interview also will be friendly. I tend to be a pretty serious person, but at the end of it, when you have, and this is not a conversation, this is more of a presentation, but if you're having a conversation, then feel free to be natural and to be yourself. And at the end of it, this is what an interview is all about, right? It's not, try not to make it Q&A. Make it conversation and you'll be far more at ease. And in terms of body language, be yourself. If you have to use your hands, please feel free to use your hands. Don't restrict yourself by sitting on them or being very strict, upright, etc. Make sure you're comfortable. Don't put yourself away in one corner, sitting on a stool where you're uncomfortable for the next 1 hour, 2 hours. Don't get yourself a wheelie chair which you're going to move back and forth. Don't rock. Some people tend to rock and talk like that. Don't do that. It gets quite distracting. Sit upright, sit tall, on the edge of the chair if you must, but just make sure you're comfortable. So that's some of the very, very basic things that I would want to touch upon. And we're going to move on to the more important stuff now, which is the types of interviews. Now, most people, especially who are interviewing for the first time with BSchool, and a lot of you guys will be with round two applications as well, will be a little nervous before your interview. So let's just break down some of the sort of interview types. A very old style of interviewing is the stress interview. You may have heard of that. Schools have, or even companies have a panel of interviewers, sometimes two, sometimes three, sometimes four people, and they bombard you with questions. They have a very stern face, they're very serious. They're there to stress you out, they're there to get you uncomfortable. Uh, Sometimes it happens in a single interview as well. But people have realized that unless that's going to be the natural environment you're going to be working in, and that's the sort of environment you're going to face every day, there's no point putting someone under stress. You're never going to really learn about them. So if your job is going to be really stressful, it's fine. You can put them under that sort of pressure and then sort of ask them questions. However, the normal and the new way of interviewing people today is to get someone really, really comfortable. Get them so comfortable that they actually open up. And that's what most interviewers do. And that's what the really good interviewers do. At a CEO level and at an organization level, more senior you are, the more likely your interviews are going to be outside of the workplace, in a bar, in a coffee shop, etc. Over drinks is pretty common. Basically, people try to get you a little tipsy, get you to get your guard down, and you're more free, you're more open. And you need to be a little cautious of that if that ever happens. But when your guard is down, you may say a lot of other stuff which you didn't mean to. So just be careful about that. But at a B school level, the main role of an interviewer is to get you as comfortable as possible. And how do they do that? Typically by encouraging you throughout. Um, at the start of a question, they may share a little bit of their background. They may have a small anecdote before the question. They will ask the question. Once you give a story, they may agree with you. They may encourage you. They may say, "Oh, that's a great story. That's been a great leadership experience. That's an accomplishment you must be really proud of." And sometimes candidates really think that my interview is going really well. My interview is lapping up everything that I say. They really love everything. They're buying everything that I say. I think don't get carried away. It's just a style of interviewing. So keep that in mind that the interviewer is trying to get you comfortable. At the end of every answer as well, they may agree with you. They may also share an anecdote on something personal, especially second year students and alumni, more so second year students. They will always, they not always, but they quite often tend to pitch in with the two bits after every question. So that doesn't mean your interview is going off really well. It's just a style of interviewing. Which brings me to my next question. So what really makes for a good interview? Once you've had an interview, how do you know it's gone off well or no? People say that, oh, I connected really well with the interviewer. I was able to speak without fumbling. I think fumbling and all is fine. It's all natural. So don't worry about it. And connecting with the interview doesn't mean anything, nor does the length of the interview. You could have a short interview, you could have a long interview, it doesn't really matter. What matters most is messaging. Were you able to get your key stories out? Were you able to talk about the things which best sell you? Um, were you able to differentiate yourself? I think if you were able to achieve that and convince the school that this is the only school that you want to attend and about the value that you can bring to the school, then you've done a good job. If you've had the opportunity to talk about some of your greatest accomplishments, but you've landed up talking about things which are less important, which don't really sell you that well, then that perhaps is not a great interview. It may still be a decent interview, but perhaps you've not best utilized the opportunity to sell yourself. So for me, a good interview is when you really, really deliver your messages. And that's what makes a good interview. At the end of the interview, you should be able to say, I got a chance to speak about my greatest accomplishment, about the greatest stories that sell me. And that makes for a good interview. Most Google interviews are blind interviews, so people only have a copy of your resume. So sometimes I get asked this question that is it okay to repeat stories? And in most cases, sure. What you're doing is you're validating your story, and it's absolutely fine. But do not, um, I would say, memorize a story and go word for word and have it scripted. Don't do that. Um, Build on your story, make it more personal, and then you should be fine. So for blind interviews, feel free to use some of the stories that you touched upon in your application and just build on them. Okay, let's get on to the key parts of the MBA interview, which is starting with the most common MBA interview questions. And these are essentially five standard MBA interview questions. It typically starts with an icebreaker, which is walk me through your CV or tell me about yourself. And I'm going to get into how to prepare answers for these individual questions very soon. These are things that we share with our clients. And feel free to use some of these strategies to help you prepare for your interviews as well. Why MBA? Sometimes they may ask you what your goals are and then why an MBA? Why now? Why now? Usually you find people who are much younger being asked the question or people who are much older being asked that question as well. Um, so sometimes the interviewer feels that you could hold on for a couple of more years. They may ask you then, why do you need an MBA now? Fifth, why our school? or rather fourth, why our school, why this particular school. And I think that's one of the most important questions. If you're not able to convince a school that this is the only school that you want to come to, you're not really doing a great job. And lastly, how will you contribute to that school? So these are the most standard interview questions, and I'm going to walk you through how to prepare for each of these. Just some general tips. How long should the answers be? 2.5 minutes in general. And please time your answers. The biggest problem that we find is that people get into a monologue, especially for the icebreakers. Walk me through a series, sometimes people get into it for about 4, 5, 6 minutes, and your interview is going to get bored and they're going to cut you off. And you're not going to get a chance to deliver some of the messages. So don't do that. And then you're going to get flustered and unnerved. So time your answers. And the way to prep, and what we tell all our clients is record your answers and play them back. There are some people who like to just go into an interview, do a mock, uh, say we're going to wing our answers. Don't do that. Don't go when you start preparing for this as well. I personally don't like to start with a mock interview. We like to start with people preparing one question at a time, one answer at a time. Take baby steps, get comfortable, build your confidence. Anyway, the first 5 questions are by far the most difficult. The behavioral ones are somewhat easier because that's you telling your story. So let's start with the icebreaker questions. I think when you're structuring this answer, make sure that you're only talking about things that you want to be questioned on or things that sell you, or things that add value. So if you've done 20 extracurriculars, you don't need to talk about all of them. If you've got about 15 accomplishments, professional accomplishments, talk about the key ones that you really want to elaborate on, and that's the way I would structure this answer. I get asked the question, should I go in reverse chronology or chronology? And my answer always is chronology. It's easier for someone to see how you've grown in an organization or grown from college through an organization up to the stage where you're at. Excuse me. So when you're structuring this answer, especially walking through your CV, start from your college activities. Start from college, the sort of subjects you studied, the extracurriculars you participated in, and move upwards into your different roles. Share a timeline. Let them be aware of what's happened because if you're just rattling off uh, 6 years of experience without any dates, it gets somewhat confusing. So you may want to throw in a designation. You want to share some dates so they're aware of the sort of progress that you're making. Some people make the mistake of kind of explaining each and every bullet of what they've done. You never finish a CV or walking through your CV in about 2.5 minutes as such. You probably want to take about 6 or 7 minutes. So don't do that. I think you want your answer to be very focused and, like I said, just an icebreaker, introducing them to the points that you want to be talking about more. Folks, we're going to go back up. When we talk about tell me about yourself, which is somewhat different icebreaker, the structure is more or less the same. The only difference is your professional experience will be a little bit more concise. Don't elaborate so much on it. Be a little bit more concise. Start off with some personal information, where you were born and brought up, perhaps, the sort of family environment you grew up in, the choices that you made, what led you to pursue your particular stream of education, activities you've been active in the community. You can talk about your professional experience for about a minute, perhaps end with things that you do outside of work, and then you've got a pretty good answer. So make it a little bit more personal. Don't just try and add 2 more sentences to walk me through your CV because that's a little bit more professional. So don't try and do that. Make it more personal. So prepare 2 separate answers and you'll be pretty comfortable. Why an MBA? I think when you're explaining any of these answers, the tone you should talk in is like you're explaining to a 15-year-old. So don't try and present. Talk, explain, and then you'll have a good answer. And the way to explain is put things into perspective. So perhaps start with a 2-line summary. I have 5 years experience and the last 3 years have been in leadership roles, for example. And then you lead up to your short-term and long-term goal. Now, in an ideal scenario, you also want to explain why you need an MBA. Now, this may not be relevant for everyone. Some people may be able to justify why they need an MBA in their current role, and some people may not. So, for example, if I'm a technologist, I have been a software engineer and I've been building tech products for the last 4 or 5 years, and I've gone through the entire product life cycle. If I want to move to the business side of it, then I need specific skills to move there. But that's more of a desire to do an MBA and a desire to shift careers and move to a business role. Whereas the need for an MBA would come if I'm already interacting with business owners, if I'm already looking at pricing products, but I don't understand the economics of products, then I need an MBA now already to add value to my current role. And if you justify the need for an MBA now, no one can ever argue with you against that. If you need an MBA, there's a possibility you may not need it now. You may need it a year or two down the line as well. So if you can squeeze in the need for an MBA now, show the sort of value that an MBA will add to your current position, and then go on to say, moreover, I have a clear vision of my goals. My short-term goal is this. My long-term goal is this. Then it's more convincing. That said, your short-term goal should be pretty specific. Don't keep it vague. Um, I want to be in marketing. That's vague. If you want to see, I want to be a product management role in a high-tech company or an innovative high-tech company such as Amazon, that is more specific. And your short-term goals should be more specific. You should be talking and using content which you've leveraged in your essays, but don't try and change your answer. Supposing you've written consulting in your essays, and suddenly you feel that, oh, this is not the story that I should have sold. I should be talking about something else. Don't change your goal. Stick to the same goal that you've come up with. Sell that story. So your short-term goal should be a little bit more specific, and your long-term goal can be a little bit more ambitious as such. But not ambitious to the extent of just saying that I want to be a CEO in a company, right? Show show your vision. You can have a medium-term goal and a long-term goal as well. When you're ending the answer, explain why you need an MBA to achieve your goals. If you're transitioning to consulting, you can say most consulting firms recruit typically via the MBA route. Or I've tried to make a transition to consulting firms and they typically recruit MBAs. So without an MBA, I find it very difficult to get there. You can also talk about the sort of work that you want to do and the need for specific skills. So the why MBA answer is well, you want it to be in the range of about 2.5 minutes. Okay, why our school? Now, for me, this is by far the most important question. If you're not able to convince someone that this is really the school that you want to go to, I don't think you're going to make it there. So if you really want to put your heart and soul into that answer and show a real passion for the school, it's somewhat like trying to propose to someone, man or woman, but you really want to convince them that, listen, I mean what I say, right? It's not that, oh, I have a backup as well, so this is my answer. That's not the way you're going to go into a proposal with a girlfriend or boyfriend, someone you want to propose to marriage. So the same thing with the school as well. Show a real passion, show that you really mean it. And the way to do it is just do your research. Talk about 3 or 4 things that really resonate with. Just because a school may be known as a finance school or a marketing school, that may not be your reason for going there. So, for example, Wharton is typically known as a finance school. But if you're going there for product management, maybe you may want to talk about the semester in San Francisco. Maybe you want to talk about other things which are relevant to you. And that's the most important part of this answer. Make it personal, make it relevant to you, make the school's offerings unique to you and to how you can benefit from their program. And a good way to show that you've really done research is throw in the names of a few people that you've spoken with. Um, I think that really adds some value over there as well. Don't try to make this like a summary of a website that you've read, or don't try and rush this answer out. Sometimes I've seen candidates give an answer in 1 minute. Unlikely you're going to convince someone in 1 minute, cover the depth of research that you've done in 1 minute. So spend some time on this answer. This answer can go beyond 2.5 minutes. You can do it for 3 minutes as well. But show real passion when you speak about this answer and why you want to join a particular school. Know the unique factors of a particular school as well. For the New York schools, Columbia, NYU, you must talk about the New York advantage. So different schools have different selling points which you must talk about. And identify that, do your research, pick your 3 or 4 things that you really resonate with, make it personal, and then you'll be able to deliver a strong answer. Similarly, how will you contribute to your school? So I think all schools are looking for people, and education as a two-way street, and people who will be active in the community. Again, do your research. Don't make this a very generic answer that I'm going to be a part of the consulting club, I'm going to be a part of the uh, net impact club, etc. It's too generic. What are you going to do there? I'm going to organize a speaker series. I'm going to get guest speakers on the campus. Again, generic answers. What you really want to do is make your answer believable, share evidence. In college, I organize a speaker series, and similarly, at the consulting club, I would like to do XYZ. I would like to build on that experience and organize a seminar. I'd like to show some experience, show some evidence. Then I would believe that what you're planning to do at school is something that you'll really end up doing. And all schools are looking for people who've been active in the community. So here's an opportunity for you to sell yourself as well. So summarizing again, don't give a generic answer. Research the school. Find out about events that have been happening out there. If you're interested in the consulting club, find out about things that have happened in the consulting club of late. Initiatives that people have started and that you'd like to continue. That'll really add a lot of value to your answer. Uh, don't be shy of talking about 6 or 7 or 8 things that you'd like to be involved in. In some clubs, they have a really, sorry, in some schools, they have a really active community and they want people who will be engaged. So you can talk about professional clubs, you can talk about interests, activities, regional clubs, community service, cover all of it, the entire gamut. Okay, so showing that you're going to be active in that community, right? And if you show evidence of having done all of this, it's even better. You're really making someone believe that you will contribute. And again, don't feel shy of mentioning the names of people you've connected with, um, especially through your conversations. You can say, from so and so person or the current president of the consulting club, this is what I learned. You just go to show that you've done that much more research and uh, makes your answer that much more believable. Okay, a couple of things to remember. Most questions may not be word for word. They can be asked uh, in a different style, different phases, in a different order as such as well. An interview may not start with walk me through your CV or tell me about yourself. Sometimes you may have an interview who says, what are your favorite subjects in college? Why did you choose this particular college? Why did you choose this particular employer? Sometimes someone may start with, why are you here today? Or why do you need an MBA? So then you need to be in the present. Don't have a mugged up answer or an answer that you've really memorized. Um, be in the present. If you have to customize your answers and you mold your answers, mold them. But the important thing is know your content. Don't memorize your content. So you should be, when you're practicing as well, turn the questions around. So you're comfortable with the same stories and changing the start, changing the end. Sometimes people may ask you, what are your goals? And then why you need an MBA. So the entire structure of your answer may change, but the basic messages stay the same. And that's what you want to practice getting out. So when you're practicing these 5 questions, then turn the questions around, ask yourself the same questions in different ways, and then move on. So just practice molding your stories, practice molding your questions. Now let's talk about the behavioral interview. Um, okay, the behavioral interview is all about storytelling. It's all about you in particular situations. So this is a great chance for you to really sell yourself. How long should behavioral interviews answers be? Anywhere in the range between 2 to 3.5 minutes. But if 3.5 minutes, you're really sometimes pushing the boundaries. You're getting to a monologue. So no more than that. If your answers are getting long, engage the interviewer. Don't make it a monologue. But 2.5 minutes for most of these should be fine. And if you tell it in your stories in an engaging manner, I think sometimes people don't feel the length. And if an interviewer interrupts you and questions you, then that kind of breaks the monotony as well. But the key to this is tell a story and tell it well. In behavioral interview questions and in behavioral interviews, the interviewer really wants to get to know how you behave in a particular situation. The biggest mistake that I find is that people and candidates spend way too much time explaining a situation rather than how they behaved in a particular situation. And that's something that you need to be aware of. When you're preparing for interviews, make the distinction. Listen to your answers, record them, play them back, and ask yourself, am I only talking about a situation, or is my behavior in that situation evident? So the question is, what is your greatest leadership experience? Is the leadership evident? Or does the interviewer have to go soul searching and does the interviewer have to go and drill deep and really try to have to find an answer out there? So the onus is on you. So make sure that you're talking about yourself and how you behave in the situation rather than just the situation. And more importantly, make sure that you're talking about you and not we. A lot of the time, I find that people are always saying, my team did this and we did this, but there's not enough you. And if an interviewer interrupts you and says, but what did you do? That's the number one sign that, listen, you're not talking about you. So don't even come to that stage. When you're practicing your answers, make the answers about you. If you have to use we, by all means do. But the bulk of the answer is still about you. You can say, I did this and my team did this. And that's fine. Right? That's a general guideline of how to prepare answers and what you should be doing. And now let's get into some of the sort of questions that are more likely to be asked. The most common behavioral questions would be, what is your greatest accomplishment? What has been your greatest professional challenge? Or what has been your greatest leadership experience? And my general tip is have a backup for each. You have no idea in which order questions are going to be asked. So don't try and say, okay, I'm going to keep this question in my pocket, I'm going to save it for later. And the moment this question comes on greatest leadership experience, I'm going to get the story out. So the interview asks me what has been my greatest accomplishment, I'm going to go with another story. Don't do that, especially if your greatest accomplishment and your greatest leadership experience is your number one story. Get your number one story out. If you see an opportunity to get your number one story out, get it out. Don't save it for later. You don't know what questions are going to be asked later. You don't know how many questions are going to be asked. So if you see an opportunity to get your best story out, get it out. That's why practice your questions. Mold your stories so they're relevant for different questions as well. But just make sure they're relevant. Don't use a leadership story for a team example, etc. Right? Or don't use a team story for a leadership example. Make sure that they're relevant and they're unique to those situations as such. But have a couple of backups. The top questions, greatest accomplishment, greatest challenge, essentially the same thing. Um, and greatest leadership experience as well. They're all interchangeable. So just make sure when you ask these questions, you get your number one story out. Kellogg tends to ask the most number of behavioral questions. Recently, I had a candidate whose interview went on for about an hour, and she was asked a ton of ways. Um, so be prepared. Some schools have a history of asking more, some less. Some are very direct. They'll ask a couple of questions and they're done. So, like I said, the length of the interview doesn't matter, but in these sort of behavioral questions, make sure that your behavior in those situations was is evident. Some of the schools, especially actually majority of schools, tend to ask a lot of team or people-oriented questions. Tell me about your greatest team experience. Tell me about a time when someone in your team was not performing. Tell me about a time when you faced conflict in the team. Tell me about a time when you experienced a lot of diversity in the team. What did you learn from the diversity? So these are all about team and essentially, or people. And essentially, when you're answering these sort of questions, make sure, I mean, you're using team oriented words as such. You're making sure that don't make it about leadership. Um, if someone talks about a time when you were not performing, don't say, okay, I gave the person a pink slip. That's perhaps not the answer that they're looking for. You may want to go deep into the situation. You can still, the situation may end with someone being fired at the end of it. But you consistently want to show the effort that you put in to help the candidate out when they were not performing and the steps that you took proactively and even perhaps by engaging some of your teammates as well. Think of it as a hypothetical situation. If you were at B-school and someone in your team is not performing, what would you do? Then try and mold your answer around that. So um, these are people-oriented answers. So make sure that you're coming across as someone who is people-oriented. Similarly, when you're talking about failure and feedback, it's quite evident what you're looking for. Okay, don't be scared. I see a lot of times candidates try to turn a failure into a success story. And sometimes failures have been your best learning experiences. And sometimes you just fail. There hasn't been a success after. Sometimes certain schools will probe for that. I found Yale a couple of times probing and only looking for failure and not for a situation where you turn that situation around and led to a success. The reason being they're trying to see resilience, they're trying to see persistence, they're trying to see how you respond to failure, how you adapt, how you grow from that. And that's what your story should be about. It's about feedback. It's about, again, growth, resilience. Um, so demonstrate that in your answers. Um, you may feel that you may want to use some of the stories that perhaps some of the recommenders may have touched upon. They may have discussed with you that, oh, I think we're going to talk about some of these things. And that's fine. Right? At least uh, you're validating some of the things that probably are mentioned. But at the end of it, don't forget, these are blind interviews. So forget what other people have written about you and forget what you've written in your essays. Make sure you choose the best story for that particular question, especially failure, feedback, conflict in a team. These are very, very specific situations. So choose your stories wisely. General tip, don't repeat the same story. So if you've covered your greatest accomplishment and then you're asked what is your greatest leadership experience, don't go and say that was my greatest leadership experience as well and repeat the same story and then rejig it by talking only about leadership. Don't do that. It seems that you don't have enough experience. So make sure that you have a bank of stories. If you have to repeat a story, say you went through an experience which was 6 months long or a year long, then break it into sections. Make it relevant. So you can say, okay, this first 3 months or 4 months or 6 months is what I'm going to talk about for leadership. Or if you're getting to and you have to go back to the same story and you're choosing a particular part of it, it's okay. As long as it's in greater depth and you're not repeating stuff that you've already covered. In general, try and use more recent stories. Don't go back in time and talk about a story from 93, sorry, from 2013, 2014, 2015. They're a little dated. Your greatest accomplishments and some of your greatest experiences will probably be more recent as you've grown in responsibility. So as far as possible, try and use stories which are more recent in the last 2 or 3 years. Um, if you have to go back in time, you should have a pretty strong reason for going back in time, and then you should explain that as well in your answer. And by and large, have a mix of stories. Don't make everything only professional. You may come across as one dimensional. So have a bunch of stories from your professional experience, from your community experience, from extracurriculars, from your personal life, etc. Some of your leadership experiences could be from the community as well. So don't feel shy about talking about them. But like I said, get your best story out. the moment you get an opportunity and it's relevant to the question. Okay, let's come to other questions you're possibly going to be asked in an interview. And you'll notice that some of these are typically ones which require introspection, and this is typically about a lot of self-awareness. What are strengths and weaknesses? So if someone asks you strengths and weaknesses and they don't say top three strengths, don't feel shy of talking about four or five or six strengths, that's fine. Yeah. But be ready to back them all up with an example in case the interview asks you for an example. So be ready with those stories. Sometimes I find people shying away from answering the weaknesses answer. And I think it's important to realize that none of us are perfect. We all have scope for improvement. So if you have to mold your answer by saying these are specific areas that I'm consciously working on trying to improve upon, that's fine. But you should have certain weaknesses. Uh, One thing about weaknesses, be careful about what you choose. Sometimes I've heard people say that I find it difficult to say no. Remember one thing, when a B school or when you're attending B school, you're going to be interacting with lots of strong personalities. So if you're not strong enough to say no to certain people, it may not go down well with certain admission committees. They want people who are assertive who are not strong. Right? Yes, they do like people who are flexible and are team players and are willing to chip in. But if you're going to run over, that's a cause of concern. So just be careful about the sort of weaknesses you talk about and put them in perspective. And the way I typically would answer them is by listing them rather than explaining each strength and going on for talking about each strength for about a minute and two and making this a 6 minute answer again. Keep your answer brief, and if you want to engage the interview, you can always say, would you like me to give you an example? Would you like me to put things in perspective? And then go ahead and engage the interviewer. Similarly, what is your leadership style? How do your colleagues describe you? How would your boss describe you? How would your juniors describe you? This is all self-awareness. And I think if you just ponder about the question, how do your juniors describe you? They're more likely to talk about uh, being very supportive, helpful, etc. Your boss may say you're very reliable and come up with other adjectives and action verbs to describe you. So think about from their perspective, from their shoes, and then answer these questions and ponder about them. What role would you play in your team? So all of these, you can use some anecdotes as well. Things you do outside of work, not really that reflective, um, but schools like people who are engaged and active in the community, who are not one-dimensional. There are certain people from certain industries, unfortunately, who work pretty long hours, 10, 12, 14 hours a day. You don't really get time for too many things, but you do get weekends. So you kind of want to explain as well that whenever you get some time, you do engage in other activities. These would typically be investment bankers, chartered accountants, um, consultants. So just bear that in mind. A question that we're seeing being asked very, very frequently this year is about COVID. How has COVID impacted you? How has COVID changed your leadership style? What have you learned from these recent lockdowns and the turmoil of the last year? So I think the important thing in such an answer is again, don't make it one dimensional. Don't I It's very tempting to say, yes, I struggled, I had to do all the chores at home, I didn't know how to cook, and I learned all these other things. Great. That's fine. But don't only talk about that. Talk about things that challenged you at work. Talk about things that you've done in the community as well. So when you're talking about COVID, talk about how you have grown through that. Share personal experiences and don't make it a generic, typical answer. Make it personal. Okay. A general tip when you're preparing for answers. I think when you're preparing for interviews, concentrate on the most important questions. There's a tendency for people to just go on and look at thousands of other questions and spend time preparing for those. Concentrate on the most common ones. There's so many data banks out there, whether you go on GMAT, whether you go on ClearAdmit, you'll see so many um, interview reports, a list of interview questions. You can create your own table. You can see the most common questions. You'll find that certain trends at certain schools, some questions are pretty unique. For example, Tuck tends to ask, what will your legacy be at Tuck? At Ross, they've always asked, or quite often they've asked, tell me about a time when you face an ethical dilemma. So understand the sort of questions some of these schools ask, and concentrate on the most important ones. Do a good job of them. You'll do a far better job by talking about and concentrating on the more important questions than focusing on the smaller ones. Um, some schools have very, very different interview styles, and I'm going to touch upon that very briefly. For Darden, for example, they pretty much say, tell me about yourself, and you've got about 20, 25 minutes to talk about yourself. So in that case, you want to create a structure. You want to have some of your key stories. You want to elaborate on your walking through your CV, go chronologically. And rather than going abstract, I would say just go chronologically. As you're talking about your childhood, your key choices in life, elaborate out there. Time yourself. Don't try to do this as a monologue in one shot, 20 minutes, very difficult. Break it up into sections. Do 5 minutes, then another five, then another five. Or cover up to college, then your first job, then your more recent job, and then lead into why you need an MBA now. And during this time, touch upon your key failures, touch upon your key uh, accomplishments, touch upon your key leadership experiences, and then you'll have a good solid answer. So, by all means, research the school's interview questions. There are loads of question banks out there, um, and just be prepared. A couple of final things. The onus is on you. So these are um, online interviews. If you cannot hear someone, then the onus is on you to tell them that listen, I cannot hear you. If you cannot understand the question, if you cannot understand the accent, the onus is on you. So don't feel shy of asking them. Don't think, oh, I'm going to sound stupid. Don't say that. You can always say, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Um, there's a slight technology glitch. Is this what you asked? If you don't understand the question, please clarify. You'll sound a lot more intelligent by clarifying rather than by answering a question which wasn't asked in the first place. Lastly, don't forget, interviewers, they're there to make you feel comfortable. And when you get comfortable, you let your guard down. And when you let your guard down, there's a possibility that you may speak certain things that you um, weren't planning to. For example, my real reason of doing an MBA is that I want to get out of my country. And you can see, I really feel connected with you, and I think that I can tell you everything. So yes, that's my real reason for getting out of my MBA because my girlfriend's in the US and I want to get out of my country. So don't do that. Um, stick to your script, stick to your stories, know your messages, and deliver them. Keep your guard up as well. Pay attention. Stay in the present. Answer your questions. Um, some very, very minor things before you get into question and answers. Is it okay to drink water? If you forget something, you need some time to think, please pause, take a moment to think, ask your interviewer if you can, or if you want, just reach out for a glass, have a sip, and you bought yourself some time, and then go on and answer. And they're not going to dissuade you from that. Another suggestion or point that sometimes people have asked me is exit this. Yeah, is it okay if I switch off my screen? Or if I cannot answer and I blank out, can I just disconnect and have the interview call me back? Not a good thing. You're going to get more flustered at the end of it. So stay in the present as far as possible. Do your best. Now with that, let's take some questions. So let's take some questions which are pertaining to uh, the online MBA interview process and what you can expect. In the comments, I can see some questions which aren't really relevant. Sure. Yes, and if any of you guys have questions which you feel that you've covered or which aren't, you don't get a chance to cover, I mean, you can just write to me, and if I'm in a position to help you in the next few days, and I'm going to. Should we be honest about our post-MBA goals, or sometimes we're not clear about our post-MBA goals? So I think in this case, you should actually talk about whatever you've written in your essays. Don't stray from that story. So if you've written that, listen, I'm coming to school to soul search, then sure, by all means, go ahead and say that. But stick to the script and stick to the story that you've written in your application. Don't say something completely random. In fact, that is something that you should address in the application form itself and in essay questions. Uh, should we say I don't have a specific goal or make up some goal? Again, I just answered that. Stick to what you've written in your application form. Can you give us a rough estimate on the chances of acceptance after an interview? And honestly, I think this really depends upon school to school. What I can tell you is that this is an exceptional year. Um, COVID, you have a lot of people who've been made redundant in work. You have a lot more people applying to school. So the number of applications, I think, has gone up drastically. I also feel that a lot of schools have put a lot of candidates on the waitlist, some even without interviewing, and then they will review the applications in round two. So this year is not going to be a general trend and something which is similar to what had happened last year. So in some schools, perhaps with a TEPA, for example, you could say you have a 30-40% chance of converting if you get an interview call. But I would say this is an exceptional year, and I would stay away from putting in specific numbers because the number of candidates has gone up at particular schools. Some schools have accepted a number of deferred admissions as well, so a certain number of seats are already occupied. So I would be uncomfortable, especially this year, of committing to a number that or a percentage of or your chances of conversion. I wouldn't do that for this year. When an interviewer is asking at the end of the interview, if you have any questions to them, what do they expect from us? I think when you're asking a question, you want to ask an intelligent question. You don't want to ask a question where information has been readily available on the website, or you could have just had a conversation with one person and got an answer for that. So you want to show a certain amount of intelligence, you want to show a certain amount of passion, you want to show a certain amount of uh, research that you've done. And supposing you don't have any questions, then just be upfront and say that, listen, I've done my research, I'm absolutely convinced that this is a school for me. And I don't really have any questions, but if I'm given the opportunity, perhaps I'd like to ask you about a couple of personal experiences and could ask something on those lines. But these are COVID times again, and there's going to be so much information that you could possibly ask, and so many different experiences that you could gain from, and you could possibly learn from if you haven't already from your conversations with current students and alumni. So make the most of this and ask some questions. And schools leave about 20% of the interview time for you to engage in and clarify certain questions and whatever your doubts are. So if you must, please utilize that time. And I hope I've answered that question as well. Um, we're towards the end of the session. So if any of you have any more questions, if you did not answered, you're most welcome to write to me. This is a busy time. I will take some time to respond. But otherwise, if you feel that you need any help with interview prep, you're most welcome to visit our website, see what sort of coaching you want to avail of. Typically, we don't do just mock interviews. We train candidates for each and every answer. We help them prepare their content. It's very easy telling someone what their question is, but candidates really struggle with their content and especially about delivering messages in a very concise manner. So we really help them do that. We spend unlimited hours on training people, and we actually take a judgment call on how much is enough. But usually we find ourselves um, chasing candidates rather than chasing us. So it's typically the other way around, and we're completely invested. So if you feel that you need help for an interview prep, feel free to reach out to us. If you want to talk about anything else, please reach out to us. Is there any right or wrong answer? Or is there any specific answer? No. The whole point is of a behavioral question is that they want to understand that the value that you bring to the table. They want to understand your uniqueness and your unique stories and experiences. So the important thing in a behavioral question is there's no right or wrong answer. Yes, there could be a wrong answer if you said in a conflict, there was a conflict and I only said this is my way, and especially if you don't explain why you did that. Or, like I said, if someone in your team was not performing, you said, listen, I just showed them the door, right? Or I escalated the situation without explaining the sort of steps that you've taken, and then perhaps that is the wrong answer. But typically, nothing is a wrong answer. They're there to learn about you. So use this as an opportunity to tell about yourself rather than, and tell your story. Be unique. Don't tell something that you think that they want to hear, right? And that's the way I would go about this. Um, we're almost done, so I'm going to take one or two last questions and then we'll wind up. What should we wear? I think I've already answered this, but please wear formals unless it specifically says don't wear formals. Wear smart casuals. So formals, shirt, blazer, tie, essential. What you wear down doesn't really matter, but then don't get caught. But typically, if you want to be in the mood of interviewing and really feel pumped, then I would say just wear the entire suit. Tie is a must for men. For women, wear a jacket. If it's winter and you want to wear a sweater, that's also fine. You can wear a jacket over that as well, but wear formals. I think you cannot go wrong with formals. Yes, and we'll just take one final question before we end. Okay. Um, I must mention that not all interviews are the same. Some schools are unique. I give an example of Darden. Some schools, like London Business School, HEC Paris, they also ask you to make a presentation. So be aware of that and please research the sort of interviews uh, that schools conduct. There's enough information out there. I cannot stress on that again. I'm going to leave you with a takeaway note since there are no more questions as such. The key thing is prepare, prepare, prepare. Don't go in underprepared. It's better to be over prepared. It's better to sound rehearsed than to just go up and say, I'm going to wing it. Chances are you may not do a good job of delivering your messages. Chances are that you may not get your best stories out as well. So keep yourself that sort of comfort, prepare. And a lot of people may not be familiar with your accent unless it's someone from the same nationality. So it's fine. I think it's better to be over prepared than be under prepared. So prepare. Don't go into mocks directly. Some people insist on doing that. I say prepare your answers, prepare all your stories, then do a couple of mocks. Do a couple of mocks with different people so you get comfortable. So you're not comfortable with one particular person as well. And I think you'll do a great job. With that, I'm going to end this session. If you have any comments, please post them in the comment section here. Write to me if you must. I'll be happy to help you or put it on the GMAT Club forums and someone will be there to help you out. If you find this useful, please give a thumbs up to this video and I wish you guys all the very best for your upcoming interviews. Thank you so much.